Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from Frontier, and thanks for stopping by. Just to remind you, tomorrow Mindspeak at the Intercontinental, Dr. Titus Naikuni, CEO of Kenya Airways, is our guest. We serve breakfast from 9:30. We start at 10. Dr. Titus Tukero Naikuni, I didn't know that was his middle name, has had a very compelling career. Late Magadi, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Information, and Kenya Airways. And I'll put up a photograph of Dr. Naikuni on the day that the President launched or named the Boeing 777. And also I'll put up a link for Mindspeak with Christine Lagarde if you haven't seen that yet. I was just thinking of Mombasa after thinking of my mother, and I'll put up a photograph that I took over Christmas of the sunset. I'll also put up a photograph of Bill Clinton. This photograph I found in Washington, in the Hirshhorn, and you can see the power of it, the magnetic power of his personality in this photograph. He's sort of reaching out, and it's as if he's just looking at you. Really a remarkable politician with a remarkable personal power. South Sudan factions have signed a ceasefire on Thursday. Mabio Garang, the spokesman for Machar's delegation at the talks, went further, telling Reuters, "We will sign the deal." Signing ceremony of agreements on cessation of hostilities and question of detainees between the South Sudanese parties at Sheraton Hotel, said IGAD. Both sides have previously said they were close to a deal, but disagreements have until now pushed back any signing. That disagreement was over the release of 11 of Machar's allies detained by the government and accused of attempting a coup. The rebel spokesman Garang, and I'll put up a photograph of him, said freeing the detainees was not so much of a demand since everyone recognizes the need for their release, he said. And a very interesting piece I came across in the New Yorker, talking about old enmities in the newest nation behind the fighting in South Sudan, it's called. These are the events of war. This is how Riek Machar, the former vice president of South Sudan, described the violence that has claimed thousands of lives in South Sudan in the past month. I reached Machar by satellite phone. At what he described at a secret location in the forest, he had escaped Juba, the capital, and gone up country into the home territory of his fellow Noya people. Talking about, this ethnic line, the split, Machar leading the Nua, Kiir the Dinka, and a UN official who visited the country spoke of the horror, including extrajudicial killings, sexual violence, and massacres committed by both sides. It is hard not to see the events of the past month as a return to the dark days of the civil war between the South and the North in the 1980s and 90s, in which 2.5 million people died from violence, disease, and famine. Given the temperaments of Machar and Kiir, the risk of a drawn-out, brutal conflict is high. And saying that the oil is actually in Machar's home region, Unity State, just south of the border with Sudan, and saying that really there's been no trickle down. Instead, the money from oil has been treated like a personal reward for those who waged the war against Khartoum. And Machar, apparently in a conversation with this lady, said on Sunday that there was no agreement. The conflict is not yet over. Until the 11 political figures accused of plotting a coup against Kiir are released from detention in Juba, he said there will be no end to the fighting. Without that, there is nothing, he told him. It becomes only ink on the paper. Described the mounting death toll as very unfortunate. They shouldn't have died, but these are the events of war. At the end of the conversation, he said, nobody likes killing. The Ugandans are invading our country. We will give them a lesson. And then she's turning to Kiir and talking about an American advisor to the president who says he's a sweetheart, which is an extraordinary description about Salva Kiir, I would have thought. And saying, there is a tendency to infantilize military men in charge by talking about them as though they were innocents. then talking about Machar's wife, Tenny, fled Juba in the early hours of December the 16th in only her slippers and a night dress. Hours earlier, Kiir's guards had disarmed her husband's bodyguards. Kiir said that he had acted to thwart an attempted coup, but his move also seemed like a preemptive attack by the president against his adversary. What followed was several days of killing. Most of the dead were Noya. Kiir and most of his senior advisors are Dinka. In Juba, Machar and Tenny lived in the same neighborhood as Kiir, but tensions between the two men had been growing for years. Each had built up a private army, drawing on extended kinship networks and recruiting underage soldiers. For months there were rumors of an impending coup. The military was restive. Soldiers often went months without receiving payment. The violence elsewhere in the country was growing worse. "Where will you go?" I asked Tenny when we spoke. The Ugandan and Sudanese governments declared their support for Kiir. In Bentu, the capital of Unity State, home to Machar's Noya people, soldiers who had joined Machar's rebellion were in retreat. "God will lead us," she said. "God will guide us." I'll put up a photograph of a Sudan People's Liberation Army soldier wounded in renewed fighting, arriving for medical attention in a clinic in Minkamen. My thoughts on this remain that it's fluid, that I think it's substantially deteriorated, and I think it's going to be difficult to patch it together again quickly. And we'll have to keep an eye on that. And clearly, it's been a poor start in this part of the world this year. Al-Shabaab threat levels are back at post-Westgate highs. You've got South Sudan has gone a little bit pear-shaped. Well, not a little bit. We've got to keep an eye on things, but I, for one, am not buying into the ceasefire being... it's the ability of the ceasefire to hold at this moment in time, because I don't think the key issues have been settled. China-Japan rivalry plays out in Africa, says Asia Times. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Ivory Coast, Mozambique, Ethiopia from January 9 to January 14, while Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Ethiopia, Djibouti, Ghana and Senegal from January 7 through January 11. The two visits took place almost simultaneously, not long after the deterioration of relationship between the countries over islands in the East China Sea, and controversy following Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine in December 2013. More than the timing of the visits and recent tensions, it was remarks by Prime Minister Abe that turned Africa into a diplomatic battleground between Japan and China in the first month of the new year. On January 12, in Maputo, Mozambique, in a barely disguised reference to China, Abe said that Japan will not just extract resources from Africa, but also create jobs. It sounded suspiciously like what Hillary Clinton said in Lusaka in June 2011. "We saw that during the colonial times it is easy to come in, take out natural resources, pay off leaders and leave. We don't want to see a new colonialism." And talking about, in my opinion, Abe had quite a sophisticated pitch for Japan in Africa, and I think he successfully, I'm sure one of his missions was to throw sand in the eye of China, and I think he successfully did that, going by the reactions we saw from the Chinese after the visit. China, of course, in 2012 had about 7 times as much trade with Africa as Japan had, but bear in mind, I think Japan has a tremendous demand, a bigger demand, just as big a demand as China, for African energy, and I think that's why he visited Mozambique, and I think that's where this sort of competition will probably be at its sharpest. And in my view, the pivot to Asia detours through Africa. I think a sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean in order to blockade the supply of that oil and gas into Asia. And then further on, he made some very strong comments comparing China ties to pre-war Europe. This is at the Davos World Economic Forum. And China's criticism of Abe adds to tensions between the countries at a time when China is flexing its military muscle in Asia, asserting claims to territory and resources. President Xi Jinping is expanding China's navy since the country's first aircraft carrier, carrying out sea trials and the South China Morning Post reporting it plans to build a fleet of 4 carriers by 2020. Interestingly, German Emperor Wilhelm II challenged British naval dominance in the run-up to the World War I, even as the two countries maintained strong trade ties. And look at this comment. The dividend of growth in Asia should not be wasted on military expansion. We must use it to invest in innovation and human capital, which will further boost growth in the region. That's what I mean about him being quite subtle, isn't it? His use of language quite clever. Pepe Escobar has written typically irreverent piece about Davos cowbells or how Davos saves the world. Masters of the universe, vaguely real or totally fake, who want to play saviour, all flocked to Switzerland this week. In Montreux, one may save Syria at the very unjazzy Geneva II charade, which I have dealt with here. In the interminable business meeting known as Davos, one has the possibility to save no less than the whole world. Some masters of the universe, such as Warren Buffett and Apple's Tim Cook, thought they had better fish to capture, fry and profit from than to hit Davos. As for security, in case an Obama drone strayed off target in the tribal areas and hit a Swiss mountain as if it was a Pashtun wedding party, not many around the real world would be shedding a tear. Rather cruel, I thought. Behind the scenes with President Obama, some photographs taken with him, accompanying that very good article by David Remnick. That's on the New Yorker at the moment. I like this photograph of the president. I came across this sentence in an article in Bloomberg. If the BJP wins control by a great deal, and these numbers seem to be indicating so, then Narendra Modi, who in my opinion is a shoo-in, will be in a position to do whatever he wants as Prime Minister. And then China, obviously there have been reports of secret offshore tax havens, and apparently the Chinese censors have demanded immediately find and remove the foreign media report, China's secret offshore tax havens. Interactive platforms must strictly check users. Related images and accusatory comments about leaders in the system of government must be deleted without exception, said the instructions. Block the user IDs of those who have an evil influence and coordinate on the ground investigations with the relevant departments. I'll put up a photograph of Rwandan troops contracted to serve as UN peacekeepers boarding a US Air Force C-17 cargo carrier bound for the Central African Republic. The way Rwanda parlayed this across the social networks was just outstanding and very 21st century, and the sequencing was interesting as well. So soon after some very borderline comments post-events in South Africa. Euro 136.87 jumped 1.1% yesterday as far as 136.99, a two-week high. Dollar index 80.49 slumped 1%. Japanese yen was bid 103.27. Violent moves in the FX markets yesterday, in point of fact. Swiss franc 0.8978. Swiss government raised the level of capital that banks must hold against their mortgage book, tightening monetary conditions. Pound 166.34, standout outperformer, continuing its winning ways and it's at a 3-year high now. Aussie 0.8710, lowest since July 2010. India rupee 62.2, South Korean won 1078.54, Rial 239.58, Egyptian pound 696.06, and the rand has popped over 11.1102.73 lost. There were some wild moves in emerging markets. The Argentinian peso suffered its sharpest fall since 2002 as the country's central bank threw in the towel and gave up on defending the currency. Currencies from Brazil, the Real, Venezuela, Turkey, South Africa, Russia all took a beating. As I said, the Aussie dollar hit a 3.5-year low and the Canadian dollar a 4.5-year low. And I think the catalyst, there were a number of catalysts, but one of them was the weak Chinese number we saw where HSBC Holdings and Market Economics basically posted a number of 49.6 for January, which is a number which signals that the Chinese economy is not expanding but contracting. You know, I'd spoken about the risk in the markets, and I wrote this on the weekend of bleeding edge, slicing up peripheral assets and some kind of frenzied orgy of violence. And I think you saw a bit of that yesterday. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. As I said, 80.49, skidded 1% yesterday. You know it's been grinding higher, but let's have a look and I'm sidelined for now. Euro dollar, I'm running that trade at 133.80 stop, 136.87 last. A big move yesterday. Sterling, of course, at a 3-year high. I'll put up a 1-year chart of that. And I was in England in August 2013, and I wrote then, that this is a recovery. You need to be net long sterling, and you can look at that article. Dollar yen strengthened the yen strengthened 103.27 last. I'll put up a chart of that as well. Gold, a very strong session, 1259.23, jumped 2.2% yesterday. And I think that's just all about the flight to quality, up 0.5% this week, heading for a 5th weekly gain. But my thinking behind it is that I think it's going to trade 1,000. Crude oil, now this has popped a bit higher again, $97.51, and I'm scaling into a short position now. It's risen for the 5th day, biggest weekly advance since December. And this was all around a US report showing US distillate stockpiles had declined sharply. Prices are up 3.4% since January 17, the most in 7 weeks. I think it's overdone. And my thinking behind that, so I'm looking to get in short. I can't see it. If it goes over 100, I think that'll be a great sell. Argentina devalued the peso after its central bank scaled back intervention in a bid to preserve international reserves that have fallen to a 7-year low of 29.4 billion, annual inflation 28%, and it's talking about blackouts and chaos in Argentina. India's party could raise up to $2 billion from the sale of its African towers. This has been on the cards for a while. Frees up cash flow. Companies had net debt of $10.32 billion at the moment, as at the end of March 31st, 2013, so quite a while ago. So they're obviously looking to play around with the balance sheet and improve the cash flow. Joyce Banda, an African arms firm, and the free use of the jet she sold has become a very murky story. A jet sold by Joyce Banda, attracting praise from key donors including Britain, is believed to have been bought by a controversial African arms group, and she is now using it for free. It can be disclosed. Bought last year by Bonox Enterprises, a firm registered in the British Virgin Islands, and sent to South Africa, where it is loaned to VIPs by the jet company Fortune Air. Both companies are linked to Paramount Group, Africa's largest defence and aerospace firm, which has already signed deals with the Malawian government for agriculture, fuel, military contracts through a network of investment firms. And apparently she's travelled more than 20 times in the past 3 months. Asked who paid for the use of the jets, her spokesman said it was well-wishers who have told us not to disclose their identities. And I think she's going to disappoint some of her more ardent fans, I'm afraid. The government on Tuesday officially tabled its sovereign wealth fund, which will use the proceeds of royalties from gold, platinum, nickel and diamonds to invest them in gold bullion stockpiles of precious stones as well as other foreign assets. This is Zimbabwe, where the FD was quite dismissive and said, a quarter of nothing is nothing. Interesting article in The Economist about what Sad Miller's lager sales say about the state of the African economies, and that's why I look at them quite frequently and talk about it. Talking about BBC, which is not British Broadcasting Corporation, but banks, breweries and cement, and saying that people are very attracted to cement companies. And I gave you the stats. Slowdown in the flow of dollars into Zimbabwe last year squeezed the economy much harder than it was generally understood. You can see that in their numbers. Lager sales there fell by a quarter, as big a slump as in South Sudan, interestingly. Mozambique, beer sales were weak, signalling that all these concerns about Frelimo and Renamo beginning to really affect the economy. South Africa didn't do too badly. Zambia sales volumes up 12%, but that might have been because of a changing tax regime. Nigeria volume growth approaching 20%. Ghana growing even faster. The South African all shares up 1.77% this year. Julius Malema has made some very choice comments. According to a report on News 24, Malema told supporters at a meeting in Kahoyi village near Komatipoort to not vote for a government that was killing them. I'm telling you, you see it on TV and think it will never happen to you. It's coming here. blasted Jacob Zuma. When you get to the ballot paper, you will see Zuma's face. Before you vote for your party, start by addressing him. Say, Zuma, before I vote for my party, let me address you. You must tell your cows, for which you built a 1 million crowd, to vote for you, Malema said to Laughter. They said in 2014 we will not have shacks, but look at how the shacks have doubled in 20 years of democracy. Rapists are terrorizing people. If you want more spacer shops for Zuma's many wives, vote for him. If you want more kraals and swimming pools, vote for him, because that is where your money goes. Dollar Rand, last trading at 11.0156. I'll put up a 1 month chart. And I said over the weekend, if the taper turns helter-skelter, and it gave you a premonition of helter-skelter yesterday, then the Rand might even hit to 12. It's like a kind of global proxy for risk. And it remains, the bleeding edge of the markets. Egyptian pound, we're just below 7. Egyptian stock markets, that's a new 44-month high. It's up 6.64% this year alone. And I wrote in that same article, if Army General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi could actually get one of the, if the equity markets had a vote, he would get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. It's rallied more than 50% since Morsi left. The Nigerian All Share is up 1.52% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 3.4%, and at a record. S&P lowered Uganda's long-term rating on January 17 to B, 5 levels below investment grade. And I hadn't mentioned that to you. Interesting article on Reuters about trading places, how Nigeria's GDP is set to overtake South Africa's, and some interesting perspectives on that. Forbes have a follow-up article to the previous story about Isabel dos Santos, and now apparently Angola's Isabel dos Santos has snared a Swiss jeweler, and saying that Forbes increased her net worth last year to $3 billion. And now she's apparently bought De Grisogono, a Swiss jeweler renowned among the Hollywood A-list for its extravagant celebrity-studded parties in Cannes and Miami Beach. And there's a pretty interesting article right there. Israeli billionaire sells Congo oil rights for 300 times the purchase price. This is the kind of thing that happens in the Congo, I'm afraid. Sold one of his Congo-based oil companies to the government last year for $150 million, 300 times the amount paid for the oil rights, in a deal criticized by transparency campaigners. Gertier, an influential figure in DRC, with close links to the Kinshasa government, denies any wrongdoing in the sale of Nesigi, which paid a $500,000 signing bonus for its block in 2006. And I'll put up a photograph of a man waving a Congolese flag during a civil and military parade marking the 50th anniversary of the independence of the DRC in Kinshasa. The Carlyle Group and Investec Management have invested in J&J Africa, a Pan-African logistics company in Mozambique. So you can see Carlyle have gotten going as well. Finally, the weighted average yield on Kenya's 10-year Treasury bonds slipped to 12.18% at auction from 12.371% in August, the central bank said. And I wrote again about this. I said, the Eurobond issue, and obviously the market's now looking forward and seeing that Eurobond issue coming, will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets. We should see a good rally in interest rates, I said. And I think that's what we saw happen with the 10-year yield. East African Breweries is planning to raise 5.4 billion shillings through a one-year commercial paper program. They said this on Thursday in an advertisement. I'll put up a link for EABL share price data and a photograph of an evening that I attended, a Johnny Walker evening. And you can see Charles Ireland in the photograph. He's the CEO of EABL, and Chris Karubi. That was 63 days ago. And also, not too long ago, Eric Wainaina kindly invited me to participate with the Tusker Project Fame guys, and I'll put up a photograph of myself and Eric. Filings with the Capital Markets Authority show that foreign investors owned 34.96% of Ichumi in November, compared to 28.74% in September, and 7.57% in June 2012. Huge uptick. And I'll put up a link for Ichumi's share price, and it's surely going to pop higher at some point in a big way. Safaricom is up 11.11% as of this morning at a fresh all-time high, and it's trading even higher today, so it's going to set another all-time high. Kenyan athletes are threatening to boycott over tax. This is where the KRA is trying to impose a tax on them. Not very happy. Kenya Airways share price data is up on the website if you want to have a look at that ahead of tomorrow's main speak. Limuru Teas plus 14% in 2014 and closed at a record yesterday. Kenya shilling firm at 85.5. Nairobi all share at a record but unchanged from yesterday, plus 4.45%. NSE 20 down slightly, up 2.78%. This year so far. We've had a great start here in Nairobi. I hope the week has gone well, and I hope we might be able to make it tomorrow at Main Speak, 9:30 Intercontinental. Take care.